June 14th, President Biden will attend the NATO Summit in Brussels. This trip will be President Biden's first trip to Europe as president. The trip builds on earlier messaging from the administration that U.S. leadership is back and that the United States is committed to NATO and multilateralism. In the first 100 days of Biden's presidency, we saw important steps to demonstrate this in practice. This included a freeze on U.S. troop movements out of Europe, vocal support for the European Union, the United States' return to the Paris Climate Agreement, and extension of the New START treaty. The focus this time will be on how the United States and European allies and partners can work together to restore and rebuild the foundations of the transatlantic relationship, while at the same time adapting it to new challenges.
Beyond its symbolic dimension, this NATO summit will also be an opportunity for NATO leaders to discuss the future of the alliance. Back in 2019 in London, when NATO leaders met for the last time, they agreed to launch a forward-looking reflection process, also known as NATO 2030. This process aims at making sure that the alliance is future-proof for the decade ahead. NATO 2030 has been led by Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg, who notably convened a group of senior experts to support his work. After months of consultations, NATO leaders will now examine the proposals made by Jens Stoltenberg for the adaptation of the alliance.
Another important focus for NATO is internal cohesion. NATO's strength derives not only from military and economic might of its members, but also from a shared commitment to the principles and values that underpin the transatlantic relationship. As laid out in the preamble of the North Atlantic Treaty, these include a commitment to democracy, individual rights, and the rule of law. Unfortunately, today these principles are being upheld unequally across the alliance. A number of NATO country governments are constraining media freedom, and others are purchasing military equipment that could compromise NATO's collective defense. This creates societal vulnerabilities that adversaries can exploit. In other words, a deficit in NATO internal values is also an external security threat.
Leaders will also discuss the external challenges NATO is facing, starting with Russia. Allies will need to examine how to respond to an increasingly aggressive Russia while leaving the door open for a dialogue with Moscow on issues of shared interest such as arms control. Allies have also to deal with an enduring terrorist threat, both domestically and internationally. NATO will need to continue its support to its partners, which are on the front line in the fight against terrorism, notably in Iraq, where NATO has deployed a training mission, but also in Afghanistan, where NATO will pursue its assistance despite the withdrawal of its troops. Allies are also likely to touch upon quite a new topic for NATO, which is China. In London, NATO leaders publicly acknowledged for the first time that China posed both opportunities and challenges for the alliance, notably when it comes to 5G or its defense ties with Moscow. Now, NATO needs to define its strategy toward China, an effort which will require a close collaboration with the European Union.
A final important step at this NATO summit will be NATO heads of state and government agreeing to update NATO's strategic concept. This document establishes consensus among the threats and challenges the alliance faces and sets the direction of travel for the coming years. The United States and Europe are natural partners. This visit is hopefully just the start of Europe and the United States working collectively and in support of one another on a broad and challenging international security agenda.